The vast Dakota Badlands, a place where hope and devastation walked hand in hand beneath an unforgiving sky. Where a woman's courage would be tested against nature's cruelest trials, and where ancient wisdom would clash with brutal savagery. This is the story of how darkness became both enemy and ally to a woman who could no longer trust her eyes, but learned to see with her heart. Rebecca Harlow stood at the edge of her homestead, fingers tracing the weathered fence post as she listened to the distant rumble of approaching wagons. The mid-morning sun warmed her face, though she could not see its light. Her world had been dark for nearly 2 years now, since the fever that took her sight shortly after claiming her husband Thomas. At 32, she had learned to navigate her small world through touch, sound, and memory, but today she would leave it behind to join her brother's wagon train bound for Oregon. "They're coming up the east road, Mrs. Harlow," called young Jamie. Wilson, the neighbor boy who had been her eyes these past weeks as she prepared for departure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 4 wagons and about a dozen riders. Your brother's leading them, just like he promised. Rebecca nodded, her gloved hands reflexively smoothing the simple grey dress that matched the darkness of her world. Her long chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid that reached midway down her back, and she carried herself with the straight-backed dignity of a woman determined not to be pitied. "Thank you, Jamie. Would you describe them to me?" she asked, a request that had become ritual between them. The boy, just 12 but observant beyond his years, provided the details she craved. "Your brother's wagon is first, the blue one with the white canvas top, then the Millers with their red wagon, those 2 brothers from Chicago with the matching brown wagons, and the Appleton family bringing up the rear. Riders flanking them. On both sides, mostly men, but a couple women too. They look ready for a long journey." Rebecca smiled, grateful for the boy's careful observations. In her mind, she assembled the caravan, painting it with colors she remembered but could no longer see. The familiar creak of wagon wheels and snorting of horses grew louder, stirring a mixture of anticipation and apprehension in her chest. The Dakota-Oregon Trail stretched over 1,000 miles of mountains, deserts, and plains. A challenging journey for anyone, but particularly daunting for a blind woman. Still, Rebecca had little choice. Her small widow's pension would not sustain her much longer, and her brother Matthew had promised her a place in his Oregon homestead, where his wife could help care for her. "Becky!" Matthew's voice boomed across the yard as the wagons halted. Moments later, strong arms engulfed her in a familiar embrace that smelled of tobacco and leather. "Lord above, it's good to see you." Rebecca returned his embrace, fighting the lump in her throat at his unfortunate choice of words. "And you as well, though not in the conventional sense," she replied, with the gentle humor she had developed about her condition. Matthew's voice sobered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Nonsense," she interrupted. "I haven't changed so much that you need to walk on eggshells around me." Her hands found his face, fingers tracing the contours that memory told her belonged to her older brother, though the new creases around his eyes and the roughness of his beard spoke of the 3 difficult years since she'd last been in his presence. "You've grown thinner," she observed, "and you've grown more perceptive," he countered with a chuckle. "Frontier life builds character and strips fat, or so Sarah keeps telling me when I complain about her cooking." The mention of his wife brought a genuine smile to Rebecca's face. "I look forward to seeing her again. Her letters have been a great comfort." As the travelers set up a midday camp to rest and take on Rebecca's belongings, Matthew introduced her to the others, making the journey west. The Miller family with their 4 children, the Abbott brothers, Ernst and Frederick, who planned to establish a trading post, the Appletons, an elderly couple following their son and his family, and the various hired hands who would provide protection along the trail. Mrs. Harlow "It's a pleasure," said a deep voice as calloused hands gently took hers in greeting. "Samuel Blackwood, scout and guide for this expedition. Your brother speaks highly of your courage." Rebecca tilted her head, orienting toward the voice. "Mr. Blackwood, I hope my condition won't cause complications for the journey." "Every traveler faces their own challenges on the trail, ma'am," he replied matter-of-factly. "Yours is merely more visible than most. We'll manage just fine." His lack of condescension was refreshing, and Rebecca found herself warming to the guide's straightforward manner. As preparations continued around her, she sat on a small trunk containing her most precious possessions: Thomas's pocket watch, her mother's Bible, a quilt sewn by her grandmother, and the few practical items she could transport to her new life. By late afternoon, her homestead had been emptied of anything useful, the small cabin locked for whoever might next claim the land. The sale had provided just enough money to pay her passage and purchase supplies for the journey. There was no turning back now. As they prepared to depart, Jamie Wilson presented her with a farewell gift, a walking stick he had carved himself, polished smooth with a handle shaped perfectly to her grip. The notches on the side are counting. "Markers," he explained, as he guided her fingers over the even indentations. 25 of them. You can use them to keep track of the days until you reach Oregon." Rebecca blinked back tears as she accepted the thoughtful gift. "I shall think of you with each notch, Jamie. Thank you for being my eyes these past months." The wagon train departed as the sun began its westward descent, Rebecca seated beside her brother on the lead wagon's bench. The familiar creaking of wheels and rhythmic plodding of oxen soon lulled her into a contemplative silence. She focused on memorizing the sounds and sensations of travel, the subtle shifts as wheels encountered different terrain, the calls of birds overhead, the changing scents as they passed through woodland and open prairie. For 3 days they traveled without incident, making steady progress across the rolling plains of Dakota Territory. Rebecca quickly established routines that allowed her a measure of independence despite her blindness. She learned the layout of each evening's camp, helped with cooking and mending, and even entertained the children with stories in the evenings. On the 4th night, as they camped near the entrance to Serpent's Pass, a narrow canyon that would provide a shortcut through a particularly rugged section of terrain, Rebecca sat by the fire, listening to Blackwood's conversation with her. "Brother, the pass cuts 3 days off our journey," the scout was saying, "but it's narrow in spots, single-file travel for nearly a mile at the tightest section." "Any risk of flash floods?" Matthew asked. "Those canyon walls looked mighty steep from what I could see on approach. No rain for weeks, and the forecast is clear," Blackwood replied. "It's safe enough this time of year. We'll start through at first light, should clear the narrows by midday." Rebecca sensed something in the scout's voice, not quite hesitation, but a watchfulness that piqued her curiosity. "You know this canyon well, Mr. Blackwood?" she inquired. A brief silence followed before he answered. "Well enough, Mrs. Harlow. It's Cheyenne hunting territory traditionally, but the army pushed most tribes north after the last uprising. Haven't been reports of trouble in these parts for nearly a year." The subtle tension in his words was not lost on Rebecca, whose lack of sight had sharpened her sensitivity to vocal nuances. "But you remain cautious nonetheless." "A good scout is always cautious, ma'am," he replied, with what sounded like a smile in his voice. "Gets his people where they're going alive." Later, as Rebecca settled into her bedroll inside her brother's wagon, she found sleep elusive. The unfamiliar nighttime sounds of the prairie kept her alert, the distant howl of wolves, the constant chirping of insects, and the occasional stomping of the oxen in their picket line. Beneath these natural sounds, she detected the quiet movements of the night watch as they patrolled the perimeter of their camp. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Dawn arrived with a flurry of activity as the travelers prepared to enter Serpent's Pass. Rebecca sat with young Emma, Miller, the oldest daughter of the Miller family, who had taken to describing the landscape as they traveled. "The canyon walls are all red and orange, Mrs. Harlow," the 13-year-old narrated as their wagon began the descent into the pass. "They twist up like giant church spires, but made of stone instead of wood. And there are little caves and holes all along the sides where birds nest. Oh, I just saw an eagle soaring above us." Rebecca smiled at the girl's enthusiasm, grateful for these glimpses into a world she could no longer see for herself. "And the sky? Tell me about the sky today, Emma." "It's the bluest blue you ever saw," Emma replied earnestly. "Not a single cloud, just endless blue that makes your eyes water if you look too long." The wagons proceeded in single file as the canyon narrowed, the sounds changing dramatically as stone walls rose on either side, creating echoes that disoriented Rebecca's carefully honed sense of direction. The temperature dropped noticeably in the shadow of the towering cliffs, and a distinct mineral scent pervaded the still air. They had been traveling through the pass for perhaps 2 hours when Rebecca first sensed something amiss. The natural sounds of the canyon, birds calling, the rustle of small creatures in the sparse vegetation, had steadily diminished until an unnatural silence pressed around them. Only the creaking wagons and plodding oxen broke the stillness. She leaned toward her brother at the reins. "Matthew," she whispered, "something's wrong." Before he could respond, a sharp crack split the air. Unmistakably a rifle shot. It echoed violently off the canyon walls, multiplying into a cacophony that made it impossible to determine its source. Shouts erupted from the wagons behind them, followed by more gunfire. "Ambush!" Blackwood's voice carried from somewhere ahead. "Take cover!" Matthew's arm shot out, pushing Rebecca down onto the wagon floor. "Stay down," he ordered, reaching for his rifle stowed beneath the seat. Rebecca's world exploded into chaos. Without sight to orient herself, the thunderous echoes of gunfire, screaming horses and shouting men created a nightmarish confusion. The wagon lurched violently as the oxen panicked, and she heard Matthew cry out in pain. "Matthew!" she called, reaching blindly toward where he had been seated. Her hands found empty space. The wagon careened forward out of control as the terrified oxen bolted. Rebecca clung to the floorboards, helpless to intervene as the vehicle rocked and swayed at dangerous speed. A sickening jolt threw her against the side panel as the wagon struck something solid. The sound of splintering wood filled her ears, and then she was falling, tumbling through space before landing with stunning force on hard ground. Pain blossomed across her shoulder and hip, but instinct told her to remain motionless. The sounds of battle continued somewhere behind her, punctuated by screams that chilled her blood. She realized she must have been thrown clear as the wagon crashed, possibly down a slope or embankment within the canyon, for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Rebecca lay still, cataloging her injuries. Nothing seemed broken, though every part of her ached from the fall. The gunfire gradually subsided, replaced by voices she didn't recognize, harsh, clipped exchanges in English, but with accents she couldn't place. "Check the wreckage," a man called from above. "Make sure none survived." Footsteps approached her position, crunching on loose stone. Rebecca forced herself to remain absolutely still, barely breathing, praying her dark dress would blend with the shadows where she had fallen. "Wagons destroyed," reported a voice alarmingly close to her. "Drivers dead. Looks like the cargo scattered down the embankment." "Any sign of the woman?" asked the first voice. "Dixon said there was a blind woman with this group. She'd fetch a good price from certain buyers in California." Rebecca's blood ran cold at the calculated brutality in the man's tone. No sign, might have been crushed under the wagon. Want me to search more thoroughly? A moment of consideration followed. No, time. The shooting will bring the army patrol from Fort Remington if they're in range. Gather what valuables you can carry and let's move out. Leave no survivors. The scuffling of boots retreated, and Rebecca remained frozen in her hiding place, barely daring to breathe. The voices and footsteps eventually faded, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional settling of debris from the wreckage above. Only when the silence had stretched for what felt like an eternity did Rebecca finally allow herself to move. Every muscle protested as she carefully pushed herself to a sitting position. Blood trickled down her forehead from a cut she hadn't realized she'd sustained, and her dress was torn in several places where sharp rocks had sliced through the fabric. "Hello?" she called softly, then with more volume. "Is anyone there? Matthew? Mr. Blackwood?" No response came except the mocking echo of her own voice bouncing back from the canyon walls. With growing dread, Rebecca realized the truth of her situation. She was alone, blind, injured, in unfamiliar and treacherous terrain without food or water, miles from any settlement. Using Jamie's walking stick, which had somehow remained. Clutched in her hand throughout the ordeal, Rebecca carefully explored her immediate surroundings. She appeared to be on a rocky shelf or ledge partway down the canyon wall. Above her lay the trail where the ambush had occurred, now ominously silent. Below, she could hear the faint trickle of water, suggesting a stream ran along the canyon. Floor. The sun beat down mercilessly as morning gave way to midday. Though she couldn't see it, Rebecca felt its heat intensifying on her skin. Thirst soon became her most pressing concern, followed by the knowledge that she needed to find shelter before nightfall brought dangerous cold to the canyon. With no better option, she began the painstaking process of descending toward the sound of water. Each step was a calculated risk, her walking stick probing ahead for stable footing on the treacherous slope. Several times, she dislodged small avalanches of pebbles that clattered down into the depths below, emphasizing the dangerous drop that awaited a misstep. The descent took hours, punctuated by rest periods when her shaking legs threatened to betray her. The walking stick became her lifeline, an extension of herself that allowed her to see the path ahead through touch. By late afternoon, the air had grown notably cooler and more humid, confirming her approach to the canyon floor. When her stick finally splashed into shallow water, Rebecca nearly wept with relief. She knelt beside what felt like a small stream, cupping the cool liquid in her hands and drinking deeply. The water revived her enough to take stock of her situation more carefully. She was alive, a miracle in itself, but survival would require shelter, food, and eventually rescue. Without knowing the full extent of the massacre above, she couldn't be certain anyone had escaped to report the attack. The grim reality was that no one might come looking for survivors. As daylight began to fade, bringing a bone-deep chill to the canyon, Rebecca gathered what dry brush she could find near the stream bank. She had no means to start a fire, but the vegetation might provide some insulation against the cold night ahead. Creating a crude nest beneath an overhanging rock, she curled into it, pulling the remains of her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The darkness that descended brought no change to Rebecca's sightless world, but the sounds transformed dramatically. Nocturnal creatures emerged, their unfamiliar calls echoing eerily through the canyon. Somewhere in the distance, a mountain lion screamed, a sound so chillingly similar to a woman's cry that it raised gooseflesh on Rebecca's arms. Sleep came, in fitful bursts, interrupted by cold pain and the constant alertness that fear demanded. Each time she woke, Rebecca forced herself to drink from the stream, knowing dehydration would kill her faster than hunger. Morning arrived with the chattering of birds and a slight warming of the air. Rebecca's entire body ached from the combined Effects of her fall, the difficult descent, and a night spent on hard ground. Rising stiffly, she drank again from the stream, then used its cold water to clean her visible wounds as best she could. Her immediate survival needs were clear: find better shelter, locate food, and determine if there was a way out of the canyon that a blind woman could navigate. With Jamie's walking stick guiding her, Rebecca began following the stream, reasoning that water often led to more hospitable areas and might eventually flow to a settlement or known waterway. The walking was easier on the canyon floor, though still challenging without sight. Rebecca developed a rhythm, walking stick extended ahead, testing each step, ears attuned to any change in the environment around her. She used the running water as a constant reference point, keeping it always within hearing distance on her right side. By midday, hunger had become a persistent companion, a hollow ache in her stomach that made her lightheaded and weakened her already compromised state. She had learned basic plant identification in her years as a farmer's wife, but without sight, distinguishing edible vegetation from poisonous varieties was nearly impossible. The strain of constant vigilance, hunger, and emotional shock began to take its toll. Rebecca's pace slowed, her steps becoming less certain. Twice she stumbled, the second time falling hard enough to scrape her palms on the rocky ground. As she struggled to her feet, a wave of despair washed over her. "Thomas," she whispered her late husband's name like a prayer, "I don't know if I can do this." The only answer was the gentle burbling of the stream beside her and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Fighting back tears that would only waste precious moisture, Rebecca forced herself to continue forward, one painful step at a time. Late afternoon brought a subtle change to the acoustics of the canyon. The sounds seemed less confined, suggesting the walls might be widening. The air carried new scents too, juniper, sage, and something else. Smoke? Rebecca froze, head tilted as she tried to pinpoint the direction of the wood smoke scent. It was faint but unmistakable, and definitely human in origin. Someone had a fire nearby. Hope and fear warred within her. The smoke might mean rescue. Other travelers, perhaps even survivors from her own wagon train. But it could just as easily be the ambushers camped nearby to divide their spoils. Caution prevailed. Rebecca moved forward with even greater care, pausing frequently to listen for voices or movement. The smoke scent grew stronger, and soon she could hear the soft crackling of a small fire. She had drawn within perhaps 50 yards of the source when a twig snapped beneath her foot, the sound seemingly amplified in the hushed canyon. Rebecca froze, heart pounding in her chest. A moment of absolute silence followed. Then the distinctive sound of a weapon being readied. Not the mechanical click of a rifle, but the creak of a bowstring being drawn taut. "Stand still, Wasichu woman," commanded a deep female voice, "or the next sound you hear will be my arrow finding your heart." The voice that had threatened Rebecca spoke again, closer now. "You are far from your people, blind one. How do you come to be alone in Two Eagles Canyon?" Rebecca remained perfectly still, her walking stick planted firmly before her like a fragile shield. "My name is Rebecca Harlow," she replied, striving to keep her voice steady. "Our wagon train was attacked. Everyone else, I believe they're all dead." A moment of silence followed, then the sound of careful footsteps approaching. Rebecca could sense the stranger's scrutiny, almost feel the weight of unseen eyes assessing her torn dress, the dried blood on her forehead, her unfocused gaze. "The raiders," the woman said, her tone shifting from threatening to contemplative. "They come. More often now, dressed sometimes as army, sometimes as Cheyenne. They bring death to both our peoples." The bowstring relaxed with a subtle sound that Rebecca's heightened hearing caught instantly. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I am Morning Sky," the woman continued, "medicine woman of the northern Cheyenne. You are injured and starving, Rebecca Harlow. These things I can see without you speaking them. Rebecca swayed slightly, fatigue and hunger conspiring to weaken her further, now that immediate danger had passed. Yes, she admitted simply. Movement rustled nearby, and a strong hand gripped Rebecca's elbow, steadying her. The touch was firm but not unkind, guiding rather than forcing. "Come," Morning Sky said. "Night approaches. Canyon grows cold. My camp is near." With no better option, Rebecca allowed herself to be led. The Cheyenne woman's guidance was surprisingly adept, accounting for Rebecca's blindness without comment or impatience. She described each obstacle before they reached it, allowing Rebecca to navigate with dignity rather than being pulled along helplessly. The camp, when they reached it, consisted of a small hide shelter nestled against the canyon wall, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. A carefully contained fire burned in a stone-lined pit, the smoke channeled upward through a natural crevice in the rock that dispersed it high above, making it difficult to spot from a distance. "Sit," Morning Sky instructed, guiding Rebecca to what felt like a folded buffalo robe beside the fire. "You must eat, then we tend wounds." Rebecca sank gratefully onto the surprisingly comfortable seat, warmth from the fire immediately seeping into her chilled bones. She heard Morning Sky moving about the camp, the sounds of wooden implements against pottery, water being poured. Minutes later, a wooden bowl was pressed into her hands, emanating a rich, savory aroma that made her stomach clench with sudden intensity. "Venison stew," Morning Sky explained. "Eat slowly. Stomach shrinks with hunger." The advice was sound, but difficult to follow. Rebecca forced herself to take small, measured sips of the broth before attempting the tender chunks of meat and what seemed to be wild onions and some kind of root vegetable. The food was simple, but perfectly seasoned with unfamiliar herbs that awakened her palate and gradually restored her strength. As she ate, Rebecca sensed Morning Sky moving around her, occasionally murmuring words in what must be the Cheyenne language. The cadence suggested activities pursued with long practice. The medicine woman was preparing something while allowing her unexpected guest to regain her strength. When Rebecca had finished eating, Morning Sky took the empty bowl and replaced it with a cup of fragrant tea. "Drink," she instructed. "Willow bark and prairie sage. Eases pain, fights fever." The tea was bitter but not unpleasant. As Rebecca sipped, she felt gentle fingers examining the cut on her forehead, then probing carefully along her shoulders, and ribs where bruises had surely formed from her fall. "You were fortunate," Morning Sky observed. "No broken bones. Spirit protected you." "Or blind luck," Rebecca countered, a hint of her characteristic dry humor surfacing despite her circumstances. A sound that might have been a suppressed chuckle came from the medicine woman. "Perhaps same thing, different words," Morning Sky continued, her examination with clinical detachment, her touch professional yet respectful of Rebecca's dignity. She cleaned the cut on Rebecca's forehead with a solution that stung sharply, then applied a poultice that smelled of crushed leaves and clay. "How did you come to be in this canyon?" Rebecca asked as the medicine woman worked. "I was told the Cheyenne had been moved north." "Most were," Morning Sky confirmed, her tone neutral but with an undercurrent of old pain. "After Sand Creek Massacre, after Washita, Army says all Cheyenne must live on reservation land far from here." Rebecca heard her moving away briefly, then returning. "But I am not most. I am medicine woman. I go where spirits guide, where healing is needed. I gather plants that grow only in these canyons, plants my people need for medicine." The explanation seemed incomplete, but Rebecca sensed it would be impolite to press further. Instead she asked, "The raiders who attacked our wagon train, you've encountered them before?" Morning Sky's movements paused momentarily. "Yes, they are like coyotes, wearing different skins to hunt. To settlers, they look like Cheyenne or Lakota warriors. To Indians, they wear blue army coats. They take what they want, kill who they please, let others carry blame. The bitter truth of this assessment settled over Rebecca. She had heard stories of Indian attacks on wagon trains, but had these too been the work of disguised raiders, spreading conflict between peoples already distrustful of one another? Their leader, Morning Sky continued, resuming her treatment of Rebecca's injuries, is called Blackjack Webster, once army scout, now deathbringer, trades with whiskey sellers, steals horses, women, children. Rebecca shuddered. He mentioned selling me in California. A sound of disgust came from the medicine woman. Yes, some men pay much for white women. Even blind one might bring good price. Her voice softened slightly. You escaped great evil, Rebecca Harlow. The blunt assessment was somehow more comforting than platitudes would have been. Rebecca appreciated the Cheyenne woman's honesty, her refusal to minimize the danger that still lurked beyond their small sanctuary. What became of the others in your wagon train? Morning Sky asked as she applied a cooling salve to the worst of Rebecca's bruises. You believe all dead? Rebecca's throat tightened. I don't know for certain. I was thrown from my brother's wagon during the attack. I heard the raiders say they were leaving no survivors. Her voice caught. My brother Matthew. We'd only just reunited after 3 years apart. Morning Sky made a soft sound that seemed to acknowledge the grief without attempting to diminish it. When body is stronger, we will look for signs. Perhaps some escaped. How long have I been in the canyon? Rebecca asked, suddenly realizing she had lost track of time in her struggle to survive. Sun has risen twice since wagon attack, Morning Sky answered. Today is third day. The information surprised Rebecca. It felt as though weeks had passed since the ambush, yet it had been only 2 days of desperate survival before Morning Sky found her. Rest now, the medicine woman instructed, helping Rebecca to a sleeping pallet constructed of fragrant cedar boughs covered with soft hides. Medicine works better in sleep. Despite her many questions and lingering anxiety, exhaustion claimed Rebecca almost immediately. She drifted into deep slumber, vaguely aware of Morning Sky moving quietly around the camp, singing softly in her native tongue. A melody that seemed to weave itself into Rebecca's dreams, transforming the horrors of recent memory into more bearable shapes. When she woke, Rebecca had no sense of what time it might be, locked as she was in perpetual darkness. The fire still crackled nearby, and she could hear the steady rhythm of breathing that suggested Morning Sky slept not far away. Carefully, Rebecca explored her immediate surroundings with her hands. The sleeping pallet was remarkably comfortable, designed to insulate the sleeper from the cold ground while providing support for aching muscles. Nearby, she discovered her walking stick, placed thoughtfully within easy reach. A sudden sound outside the shelter froze her movements, the soft displacement of gravel beneath a careful foot. Someone or something was moving stealthily around their camp. Morning Sky? Rebecca whispered urgently. The breathing pattern nearby changed instantly, indicating the medicine woman had awakened. A hand touched Rebecca's arm briefly. A silent instruction to remain still. Rebecca heard Morning Sky rise soundlessly and move toward the shelter's entrance. A long moment of silence followed, then came the distinctive creak of a bowstring being drawn. Show yourself, Morning Sky commanded, her voice carrying quiet authority. A pause, then a male voice responded in Cheyenne. Rebecca couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested caution rather than aggression. An exchange followed, the unknown man speaking rapidly, while Morning Sky responded with shorter phrases, her voice maintaining its measured calm. Finally, Morning Sky spoke in English. Rebecca, there is no danger. My brother's son, Swift Elk, brings news. Rebecca relaxed marginally, though her heart still raced from the momentary fear. She heard 2 sets of footsteps entering the shelter, followed by the sounds of the fire being stoked and fresh wood added. The newcomer spoke again in Cheyenne, his voice younger than Rebecca had expected, perhaps belonging to a man in his early 20s. Whatever news he brought caused Morning Sky to inhale sharply. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, sensing the sudden tension. Morning Sky switched to English. "Raiders have camped 2 days' journey north. Swift Elk tracked them after seeing smoke from your burning wagons. They have prisoners." Rebecca sat upright, hope surging through her. "Survivors from our train. Is my brother among them?" A brief exchange in Cheyenne followed before Morning Sky answered. 3 prisoners, 2 men, 1 woman, kept in cage made of wagon parts. Swift Elk could not get close enough to see faces. "Have to help them," Rebecca said immediately, already reaching for her walking stick. "We will," Morning Sky assured her, a hand gently restraining Rebecca's movement. "But with wisdom, not rush. Raiders have 20 men, many weapons. We are 3, 1 blind." The stark assessment silenced Rebecca momentarily. She recognized the truth in Morning Sky's words, yet the thought of survivors, possibly including Matthew, suffering while they delayed, was unbearable. "What can we do?" she asked finally. Another exchange in Cheyenne took place, this one longer and with occasional disagreement, evident in the tones if not the incomprehensible words. "Swift Elk will go to Northern Cheyenne hunting camp," Morning Sky explained eventually. 5 warriors there, good men who hate Webster and his raiders. He will bring them here to make plan." "How long will that take?" Rebecca pressed. 1 day to reach, 1 to return with warriors. 2 more days of waiting while the captives suffered. Rebecca's hands clenched with frustration, but she recognized the necessity of the delay. Without help, any rescue attempt would be suicide. "While Swift Elk journeys," Morning Sky continued, "I prepare your body for what comes, many medicines to strengthen, teach you ways to move without eyes when time for action comes." Rebecca hadn't expected this. "You mean for me to be part of the rescue?" "You are witness," Morning Sky stated simply. Only survivor who saw raiders without disguise heard their true speech. Your testimony needed to convince army, perhaps stop raids. The realization dawned on Rebecca that Morning Sky was looking beyond the immediate rescue to a larger purpose, ending the cycle of violence that claimed victims from both their peoples. Swift Elk departed before dawn, carrying minimal supplies to enable faster travel. As the sounds of his departure faded, Morning Sky began Rebecca's instruction, a regimen more rigorous than anything she might have expected. The medicine woman started with Rebecca's remaining senses, conducting exercises to heighten her already enhanced hearing. She placed objects at varying distances, having Rebecca identify their locations by the subtle sounds they made when struck by a small stick. Then came training in distinguishing footsteps, the difference between human and animal, between someone walking normally and attempting stealth, between the soft-soled moccasins worn by the Cheyenne and the heavier boots favored by white settlers and soldiers. "Close your eyes," Morning Sky instructed at one point, then laughed softly at her own mistake. "Forgive me. Clear your mind. Listen beyond your ears." Rebecca tried to understand what the medicine woman meant, focusing intently on the sounds around her. Gradually, she became aware of something beyond normal hearing, an almost tactile sense of presence, of space occupied versus space empty. "I can feel you," she said with wonder, turning her face unerringly toward where Morning Sky stood. "Not hear, not smell, but feel." "Good," Morning Sky approved. "What Cheyenne call ghost sense. Blind hunters sometimes develop, animals have always." Throughout the day, Morning Sky alternated physical training with periods of rest, during which she administered various herbal preparations. Teas to build strength, poultices to speed the healing of injuries, and a particularly bitter concoction that she claimed would sharpen Rebecca's remaining senses further. By evening, Rebecca was exhausted but remarkably improved. The persistent ache of her bruises had subsided to occasional twinges, and her confidence in navigating without sight had grown substantially under Morning Sky's expert guidance. As they shared a meal of roasted rabbit and wild tubers, Rebecca found the courage to ask a question that had been forming since her rescue. "Why are you helping me? Our peoples have not been friends." Morning Sky was silent so long that Rebecca wondered if she had given offense. When the medicine woman finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of carefully chosen words. 6 winters ago, I had a daughter, strong, beautiful, named for first light touching mountains, Dawn Blossom. She paused, and Rebecca sensed the pain beneath the measured tones. Soldiers came to our village while men were hunting, said all must leave traditional grounds, go to reservation. Dawn Blossom was sick with fever. I begged for time until she was stronger for journey. Another pause, longer this time. Young Lieutenant showed mercy. Against orders, he gave us 1 moon cycle before we must travel. Made secret arrangement for medicine from Army doctor. Morning Sky's voice softened with remembered gratitude. Dawn Blossom lived because one white man saw her as child, not enemy. What happened to him? Rebecca asked gently. Court-martialed. For disobeying orders. Dishonorably discharged. The Cheyenne woman's tone held regret, but no surprise. I made promise then. To honor his sacrifice by showing same mercy when spirits brought opportunity. Rebecca absorbed this in silence. Understanding the debt Morning Sky felt, she was repaying through her assistance. But there seemed something more personal in the medicine woman's investment in their developing plan. These raiders, Rebecca ventured carefully. You have other reasons to want them stopped. Morning Sky's movement stilled. Yes, she admitted. Finally, Webster's men raided 3 Cheyenne camps last changing leave season. Took 6 young women and 4 children, sold them to men in mining towns, trading posts. Her voice hardened. My sister's daughter among them, 12 summers old. The horror of this revelation struck Rebecca like a physical blow. The personal cost of the conflict to this woman who had saved her, who was now teaching her to survive. It was almost unimaginable. I'm so sorry, she whispered, knowing the inadequacy of the words, even as she spoke them. Sorrow does not bring justice, Morning Sky replied without bitterness. Action might. They sat in companionable silence after that, the crackling fire and night sounds of the canyon creating a peaceful backdrop that belied the dangers waiting beyond their small haven. Rebecca felt a strange sense of purpose taking root within her. A determination to help end the violence that had claimed so many lives, both white and Cheyenne. As she drifted towards sleep that night, Rebecca reflected on the unexpected turn her journey had taken. She had left her homestead expecting to find security with her brother in Oregon. Instead, she found herself forming an unlikely alliance with a Cheyenne medicine woman, preparing to confront murderous raiders in a desperate rescue attempt. Thomas would scarcely recognize the woman she was becoming, she thought. Stronger, more determined, willing to face dangers that would have terrified her former self. Perhaps blindness had forced her to develop strengths she would otherwise never have discovered. Morning Sky's voice came softly through the darkness, as if responding to Rebecca's unspoken thoughts. Sleep well, blind one. Tomorrow we become warriors together. The 3rd day of Rebecca's time with Morning Sky began before dawn, marked by a subtle shift in the air that Rebecca had learned to recognize as the transition from night to earliest morning. The medicine woman was already awake, brewing a pungent tea that filled their small shelter with aromatic steam. Drink, Morning Sky instructed, placing a warm cup in Rebecca's hands. Buffalo sage and thunder root. Gives strength, clears mind. Rebecca sipped the bitter liquid, no longer bothered by the unfamiliar tastes that had initially seemed so strange to her palate. Her body had quickly adapted to the Cheyenne woman's remedies, each one serving a specific purpose in preparing her for the challenges ahead. "Today we journey," Morning Sky announced as Rebecca finished the tea. "Must learn canyon paths before warriors arrive. You will need to move with certainty when time comes." The prospect was daunting. Rebecca had grown relatively comfortable, navigating the immediate area around their shelter, but the wider canyon, with its unpredictable terrain, seemed a far more intimidating challenge. "Where are we going?" she asked, reaching for her walking stick. "3 places," Morning Sky replied, already gathering supplies into a small pack. "First a high point where signals can be seen from hunting camp, then to North Canyon entrance, near Raider camp, finally to river crossing where rescue may be best attempted." Rebecca nodded, mentally preparing herself for what would clearly be a demanding day of travel. She had come to trust the medicine woman's judgment implicitly, recognizing that Morning Sky never pushed her beyond her true capabilities, though often to the very edge of what Rebecca believed possible. They set out as the first birds began their dawn chorus, Morning Sky leading with occasional verbal guidance, but increasingly allowing Rebecca to navigate using her developing skills. The terrain varied dramatically, sometimes smooth alongside the stream that bisected the canyon, other times rocky and treacherous as they climbed toward higher ground. "Listen to canyon walls," Morning Sky instructed as they ascended a particularly challenging section. "Sound changes when path narrows or widens. Echo tells what lies ahead." Rebecca concentrated, discovering that the medicine woman was right. The subtle acoustics of the canyon provided a constant stream of information if one knew how to interpret it. A sharper echo suggested narrowing walls, while certain hollow resonances indicated larger spaces opening ahead. After nearly 2 hours of steady climbing, they reached what Morning Sky described as a natural shelf jutting from the canyon wall, high enough to provide a clear sightline to the distant hunting camp while remaining hidden from the valley floor below. "Rest," the medicine woman directed, guiding Rebecca to a flat rock warmed by the morning sun. "From here, swift elk will signal with smoke when warriors approach. Must be ready." As they shared strips of dried venison and handfuls of tart berries, Morning Sky described the surrounding landscape in precise detail, creating a mental map that Rebecca could hold in her mind. The canyon system was more complex than she had initially understood, multiple branches splitting from the main passage, some leading to dead ends, others providing routes to the plains beyond. "Raiders camp here," Morning Sky explained, placing Rebecca's hand on a rough surface that Rebecca realized was a map etched into a flat stone. Her fingers traced grooves that represented canyon walls, a larger depression marking the raider encampment's location. 3 approaches possible, each with danger. Rebecca committed the map to memory through touch, understanding that their plans might require flexibility depending on what swift elk discovered and how many warriors joined their rescue attempt. Their next destination was a concealed observation point near the northern canyon entrance, where the raiders had established their camp. The journey required greater caution as they were moving closer to potential enemy patrols. "Step exactly where I step," Morning Sky warned as they descended into a dry stream bed. "Soft sand holds footprints. Raiders have trackers." Rebecca followed, with intense concentration, placing each foot precisely where she sensed Morning Sky had stepped. They moved in silence now, the medicine woman occasionally touching Rebecca's arm to signal a halt, listening intently before proceeding. The air changed subtly as they approached the northern section of the canyon, warmer, carrying hints of wood smoke and the distinctive odor of horses. Rebecca's heightened senses detected these changes immediately, alerting her to human presence well before Morning Sky guided her into a concealed crevice in the canyon wall. "Raider camp beyond next bend," the medicine woman whispered, her mouth close to Rebecca's ear. "Speak only in breath, no voice." They settled into the natural hiding place, which Morning Sky had clearly used before. Rebecca could feel worn smoothness on the rock ledge, where someone had sat many times, observing the canyon below. For over an hour they remained motionless, listening. Rebecca gradually distinguished patterns of activity from the distant camp. The rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood, horses nickering, occasional shouts between men whose words were indistinct, but whose tones conveyed crude humor and casual cruelty. Then came a sound that made Rebecca's blood run cold, a woman's cry, quickly muffled, followed by harsh male laughter. "The prisoners!" She breathed, barely audible. Morning Sky's hand squeezed her arm once in confirmation. "How many men can you hear?" the medicine woman asked in the barest whisper. Rebecca closed her eyes from habit, concentrating entirely on the auditory information filtering through the canyon. She separated and counted distinct voices, footsteps, movements. "At least 12, she replied with surprising confidence. "Perhaps more in shelters we cannot hear." "Good," Morning Sky approved. "Your ears become true eyes." They remained at the observation point until midday, gathering crucial intelligence about the raiders' routines, guard changes, and the approximate location of the prisoners within the camp. The information would be vital for planning the rescue once Swift Elk returned with warriors. Their final destination required circling wide around the raider camp, a journey that tested Rebecca's endurance and newly developed skills to their limits. By late afternoon, they reached what Morning Sky described as a natural ford, where the canyon stream widened and shallowed, creating a viable crossing point less than a mile from the raider encampment. "We rest here," Morning Sky decided, guiding Rebecca to a sheltered hollow beneath overhanging rocks. "Wait for darkness, then return to our camp. Too dangerous to move near raiders in daylight." The forced inactivity was difficult for Rebecca, her mind racing with concerns for the captives and anxiety about Swift Elk's mission. What if he failed to convince the warriors to help? What if the raiders moved their prisoners before rescue could be attempted? Morning Sky seemed to sense her distress. "Tell me of your brother," she said quietly. "The one you seek." The invitation to speak of Matthew caught Rebecca by surprise, but she found herself grateful for the distraction. "He's 5 years older than me," she began. "Always the adventurous one in our family. Went west after the war while I stayed in Iowa with my husband." "Your husband is gone?" Morning Sky asked. "Yes, influenza took him 2 years ago." Rebecca's hand instinctively rose to her sightless eyes. "The same fever that took my vision." "You survived when he did not." Strong spirit. Rebecca had never thought of it that way, had viewed her survival and subsequent blindness as a cruel twist of fate rather than a testament to inner strength. Morning Sky's perspective offered a different frame for her experience. "Matthew wrote about Oregon for years," she continued, "described the land, the opportunities. After Thomas died and the farm became too much for me to manage alone, Matthew insisted I join him, said his wife Sarah would welcome the help with their children." A lump formed in her throat. "They have 4, 2 boys and twin girls. I've never met them." "You will," Morning Sky said with quiet certainty. The simple assertion, delivered without artifice or false comfort, steadied Rebecca. The medicine woman didn't offer hollow reassurances that Matthew was among the captives or that their rescue would succeed. Instead, she offered a vision of possibility that acknowledged Rebecca's strength and resilience. As dusk settled over the canyon, they began their return journey to the camp, moving more confidently through terrain that had become familiar to Rebecca despite her blindness. Morning Sky varied their route slightly on the return, explaining that it was wise never to use exactly the same path twice when enemies might be tracking. They reached the camp well after dark to find it undisturbed in their absence. Morning Sky immediately set about preparing food while Rebecca collected fresh water from the nearby stream, a task she could now accomplish independently thanks to the medicine woman's training. Tomorrow, Swift Elk returns with warriors, if spirits favor. Our cause, Morning Sky said as they ate. Tonight we prepare medicines for journey and battle. Rebecca listened attentively as Morning Sky explained the properties of various preparations. Poultices that would stop bleeding, powders that would draw infection from wounds, tinctures that would dull pain or provide bursts of energy when needed. The medicine woman's knowledge was vast, combining botanical science with spiritual practice in ways that defied Rebecca's previous understanding of healing. This one most important, Morning Sky said, placing a small leather pouch in Rebecca's hand. It contained something that felt like fine sand or powder, ghost medicine, for seeing without eyes. What does it do? Rebecca asked, intrigued. Opens inner vision. Some Cheyenne hunters use before tracking difficult prey. Allows sensing of things beyond normal sight. Morning Sky's voice grew more serious. Powerful medicine, not without risk. Makes heart race, body hot. Too much can bring visions that frighten or confuse. Rebecca weighed the small pouch in her palm. You think I'll need this? Perhaps. Keep close. Use only if necessary, when normal sense is not enough. Morning Sky took the pouch and secured it to a leather cord, which she placed around Rebecca's neck. Small pinch under tongue dissolves quickly. Effects come fast, last until heart beats 1,000 times. The preparation of medicines continued late into the night, with Morning Sky teaching as she worked, ensuring Rebecca could identify each remedy by smell and texture. The activity helped distract from the anxiety of waiting, of not knowing whether help would arrive or what the coming day might bring. When they finally settled for sleep, Rebecca found herself oddly calm despite the perilous situation. Something had fundamentally shifted in her understanding of herself since the Wagon Train massacre. The helpless widow had been replaced by a woman of growing capability, one who had survived against impossible odds and now prepared to face even greater challenges. Morning Sky, she said softly, uncertain if the medicine woman was still awake. Yes? Thank you, not just for saving me, but for teaching me to save myself. A long moment of silence followed. Then Morning Sky replied in a voice gentled by rare emotion. You had strength already, needed only to find it in darkness. Rebecca pondered this as she drifted towards sleep. Perhaps that was the greatest gift of Morning Sky's teaching, not the practical skills of survival, valuable though they were, but the recognition of inner resources Rebecca hadn't known she possessed. Dawn arrived with the distant call of an eagle, its cry echoing through the canyon with haunting clarity. Rebecca woke instantly, sensing Morning Sky already moving about the camp with purposeful energy. Swift Elk returns, the medicine woman announced without preamble. Many sets of footsteps approach from South Canyon Path. Warriors come with him. Rebecca sat up, every sense alert. How can you be certain it's them? Pattern of movement. Cheyenne walk differently than white men. Feet understand earth differently. Morning Sky handed Rebecca a cup of the now familiar morning tea. Drink quickly. Council begins soon. The approaching footsteps grew audible to Rebecca's ears as she finished the strengthening brew. Not just 2 or 3 sets, but many. Perhaps 8 or 9 people moving with the distinctive rhythm Morning Sky had identified as Cheyenne. Their arrival brought a dramatic shift to the small camp's energy. Rebecca noted a curious restraint in the newcomers, no loud greetings or questions, just the subtle sounds of many bodies arranging themselves in what she sensed was a ceremonial formation. Morning Sky spoke in Cheyenne, her voice carrying formal tones that required no translation to convey their significance. This was no casual gathering but a war council, with all the gravity such occasions demanded. The council began with formal introductions in both Cheyenne and English, a courtesy to Rebecca that she appreciated deeply. Swift Elk spoke first, his voice younger, but carrying the confident authority of someone who had proven himself. "I bring 7 warriors from hunting camp," he announced. "Strong men who have counted coup against enemies, who know these canyons as they know their own hands." Each warrior spoke his name in turn, some adding brief phrases in English that Rebecca understood to be personal accomplishments or relations that established their standing in the tribe. The last voice that addressed her belonged to an elder, whose tone carried decades of wisdom and experience. "I am Grey Wolf, war chief of northern Cheyenne in these hunting grounds," he stated in surprisingly clear English. "Swift Elk says you witnessed Blackjack Webster's true face, that his men killed your people while wearing our appearance." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, unconsciously straightening her posture under the weight of the chief's attention. "They attacked our wagon train without warning or provocation. I heard their leader, Webster, speak of disguising their actions as the work of Cheyenne warriors." Grey Wolf made a sound of grim acknowledgement. "These raiders have become like sickness in our territory. They murder whites wearing our dress, then murder Cheyenne wearing blue coats. Each side blames the other, while raiders grow rich on stolen goods." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered warriors. "My brother may be among the prisoners," Rebecca added, "but even if he is not, those captives deserve rescue from whatever fate Webster intends for them." "We agree," Grey Wolf stated, "but not simply for 3 white prisoners. Larger purpose guides us. Webster's raiders must be stopped permanently, or killing continues. Your testimony to army officers could help end this false war between our peoples." Morning Sky spoke in Cheyenne, her words triggering an intense discussion among the warriors. Rebecca could follow none of the specific content, but the tone suggested strategic planning rather than disagreement about objectives. Swift Elk eventually addressed her in English. "We have observed Raider Camp for many days. Know their habits, strengths, weaknesses, but rescue difficult. 20 raiders with many firearms against our smaller number. What approach do you suggest?" Rebecca asked, directing her question to the group rather than any individual. Grey Wolf answered after a brief consultation with his warriors. "Direct attack impossible. Too many enemies with repeating rifles. But Cheyenne know ways of old. Honors, ways of silence and shadow." The strategic plan that emerged over the next hour demonstrated a sophistication that impressed Rebecca deeply. The Cheyenne would not attempt a frontal assault, but would instead employ a series of coordinated distractions and precise strikes designed to create confusion among the raiders, while minimizing risk to both the rescuers and captives. "Night attack brings greatest advantage," Grey Wolf explained. "Raiders drink firewater after sunset, grow careless. Guards become fewer, less watchful." "There is another factor in our favor," Morning Sky added. "Moon enters shadow tonight. Sky will be black as Cave Bear's den." Rebecca absorbed these details, mentally constructing the planned operation. "What role do you see for me?" she asked finally. "I want to help, but I won't endanger others unnecessarily." A lengthy exchange in Cheyenne followed her question. Rebecca sensed some disagreement among the warriors, though their tones remained respectful rather than contentious. "You will remain with Morning Sky initially," Grey Wolf finally decided. "Wait at river crossing, where rescue party will bring freed prisoners. Your knowledge of wagon train people helps identify survivors, and Morning Sky's medicines may be needed for injured." Rebecca nodded her acceptance of this role, though part of her wished for more direct involvement in the rescue itself. Still, she recognized the wisdom in the assignment. Her blindness would indeed be a liability during the stealth phase of the operation. "There is another duty that falls to you alone," Grey Wolf continued, his voice taking on added gravity. When prisoners are secured, you must travel with Swift Elk to Fort Laramie. Speak to army commanders there. Tell what you witnessed of raiders disguised as Cheyenne. Your words as white woman may be heard when ours are dismissed. This larger purpose resonated with Rebecca. Beyond the immediate rescue lay the potential to end the cycle of violence that had claimed so many lives on both sides. Her testimony might help expose Webster's deception and prevent further bloodshed. "I will do it," she promised, "whether my brother is among the rescued or not." Preparations began immediately following the council. Warriors departed in pairs to position themselves around the raiders' camp, establishing observation points from which they would launch the coordinated attack after nightfall. Swift Elk remained behind briefly to finalize details with Morning Sky and Rebecca. "Raiders grow confident, careless," he reported. "Believe no threat exists in these canyons." 2 days ago, they sent half their men with wagons of stolen goods toward trading post at 3 Rivers. 13 raiders remain with prisoners. "Better odds," Morning Sky observed. "Still dangerous," Swift Elk cautioned. "Remaining men have many firearms. Keep prisoners in cage of wagon metal at center of camp." Rebecca absorbed this information, trying to envision the layout based on the descriptions she'd received and the sounds she'd heard during their observation. "Are the prisoners treated poorly?" she asked, dreading yet needing to know the answer. A hesitation preceded Swift Elk's response. "Men are made to work, digging holes in canyon floor, looking for gold, perhaps. Woman is—" His voice faltered. "Briefly, kept separate in Raider Chief's tent." The implication was clear, sending a wave of nausea through Rebecca. If the female prisoner was her brother's wife, or any woman from their wagon train, how will the attack unfold, she asked, forcing herself to focus on the practical aspects of the rescue. Swift Elk outlined the strategy in precise detail. 3. Warriors would create diversions at different points around the camp perimeter, small fires and controlled rock slides to draw raiders' attention outward. Meanwhile, Grey Wolf and 3 selected warriors would infiltrate the center of the camp to free the prisoners. The remaining Cheyenne would establish a protected corridor of escape leading to the river crossing where Rebecca and Morning Sky would wait with horses. "We move in 4 hours, Swift Elk concluded, "when sun touches Western Canyon rim." After he departed, Morning Sky guided Rebecca through final preparations. They gathered essential medicines into portable pouches, prepared bandages from softened hides, and collected supplies needed for potentially injured survivors. "You should rest while possible," Morning Sky advised as their preparations concluded. "Coming night brings great challenge." Rebecca tried to follow this sensible advice, but found sleep impossible as her mind churned with anxiety and hope. Instead, she practiced the focusing techniques Morning Sky had taught her, preparing herself mentally for whatever the night might bring. The journey to the river crossing began as dusk gathered, Morning Sky leading with 5 horses obtained from the hunting camp. They traveled in complete silence, minimizing any chance of alerting raider patrols to their movement. "Here," Morning Sky whispered when they reached their destination. "Natural hollow behind River Bend. Horses protected from sight. We wait among rocks above water." They positioned themselves carefully, creating a small, sheltered area where injured captives could receive immediate treatment while remaining hidden from potential pursuit. Then began the most difficult part of any battle plan, the waiting. Minutes stretched into hours as darkness deepened around them. Rebecca's senses strained for any indication that the rescue attempt had begun. The night insects chirped steadily, occasionally falling silent when larger creatures moved nearby, then resuming their chorus after the disturbance passed. "It begins," Morning Sky whispered suddenly. Rebecca hadn't heard anything unusual, but trusted the medicine woman's superior. knowledge of the canyon. Moments later she detected it too, a distant commotion, faint shouts carrying on the night air, followed by what might have been gunshots far upstream. First diversion, Morning Sky confirmed. North Ridge fire. Listen. A second disturbance erupted from a different direction, then a third. The coordinated distractions designed to confuse and divide the raiders' response. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest as she envisioned the Cheyenne warriors moving silently into the camp amid the chaos. The waiting became nearly unbearable as the distant sounds of conflict intensified. Sporadic gunfire echoed through the canyon, making it impossible to determine specific outcomes of the battle. Rebecca clutched the small medicine pouch at her neck, offering silent prayers for the safety of both the prisoners and their rescuers. "Someone comes!" Morning Sky hissed, suddenly alert. "Many footsteps, moving fast!" Rebecca strained her ears, detecting what the medicine woman had already heard. Multiple people approaching along the canyon floor, moving with urgent purpose. She could distinguish at least 6 or 7 individuals, some moving smoothly, others with irregular gaits suggesting injury or exhaustion. Cheyenne call, Morning Sky identified as a low, haunting signal that resembled a nightbird's cry, reached them. "Our people come with freed ones." The approaching group reached their position moments later, their arrival marked by labored breathing and the soft splash of feet crossing the shallow river. Rebecca stood, every sense alert as she tried to identify the newcomers. "Morning Sky?" Grey Wolf's voice came through the darkness, tense with urgency but controlled. "Here," the medicine woman replied, moving forward to meet them. "Bring wounded to Hollow. Rebecca, prepare medicines." Rebecca moved with practiced efficiency despite her blindness, laying out the prepared bandages and remedies in the order they would likely be needed. She heard multiple people being guided to their sheltered position, including at least one who seemed unable to walk without assistance. "Rebecca?" A hoarse, disbelieving voice called from among the rescued prisoners. "Rebecca Harlow?" Her heart stopped. "Matthew?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. Stumbling footsteps approached, then familiar hands grasped her shoulders. "My God, it is you. They told me a blind woman had survived, but I couldn't believe." Her brother's voice broke with emotion. Rebecca embraced him fiercely, overwhelmed by the miracle of his survival. He felt thinner, his frame radiating exhaustion, but he was unmistakably alive. "Are you injured?" she asked urgently, her hands automatically checking him for wounds. "Nothing serious. Worked half to death digging for non-existent gold, but I'll recover." His voice darkened. "Jacob Miller wasn't so fortunate. They killed him yesterday when he collapsed from exhaustion." Rebecca absorbed this grim news as Morning Sky moved efficiently among the rescued captives, administering to injuries with quiet incompetence. "Sarah?" Rebecca asked hesitantly, dreading the answer. "Was she with you?" Matthew's grip on her arms tightened. "She was taken." He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. "Is she here now? Among those rescued?" Rebecca pressed. "Yes," a new voice answered, female, unfamiliar, with the distinctive accent of the northern Cheyenne. "I bring her. She needs medicine woman's help." Rebecca stepped back as the woman guided someone toward Morning Sky's care. From the labored breathing and unsteady movements, Rebecca could tell Sarah was in poor condition. Raiders were cruel to her, Matthew said quietly, the words clearly inadequate to describe what his wife had endured. "But she's alive, and now free." Swift Elk's voice cut through the reunion. "Must move quickly. Raiders follow. Some escaped our warriors. Ride for main camp to bring reinforcements." The urgency in his tone galvanized the group into action. Those capable of riding independently were quickly paired with horses, while the more seriously injured were helped onto mounts with stronger companions. "Rebecca rides with me," Swift Elk decided. We take South Canyon Path toward Fort Laramie. Immediately, others follow Morning Sky to hunting camp hiding place. No, Rebecca protested. I need to stay with my brother and his wife. No time for discussion. Grey Wolf intervened firmly. Swift Elk speaks truth. You must reach Fort Laramie with witness testimony before Webster gathers full strength. Your brother and his woman will be safe with our people. Matthew squeezed her hand. He's right, Rebecca. What you saw, what you know, it could stop these raids permanently. Sarah and I will recover with the Cheyenne's help. Rebecca recognized the logic but still hesitated, reluctant to separate from her brother so soon after finding him alive. How will I find you afterward? Morning Sky knows, Grey Wolf assured her. When army moves against Webster, she brings your family to fort. All come together again if spirits will it. The distant sound of pursuit settled the matter. Rebecca embraced her brother once more, then allowed Swift Elk to guide her to his horse. With practiced movements that spoke of extensive preparation, the group separated, the majority of rescued prisoners and warriors heading east toward the hidden hunting camp, while Rebecca and Swift Elk turned south toward Fort Laramie. 3-day ride if we push hard, Swift Elk explained as they galloped away from the river crossing. Must stay ahead of Webster's riders. Rebecca clung to his waist, the unfamiliar sensation of horseback, riding at such speed both terrifying and exhilarating. Her blindness actually proved advantageous in one respect. Unable to see the dangerous terrain they traversed, she couldn't fully appreciate the risks Swift Elk was taking to maintain their pace. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from Swift Elk's water skin. By dawn, they had left the canyon system behind, emerging onto the rolling plains that would lead them eventually to Fort Laramie. Raiders still follow? Rebecca asked during one of their brief stops. 2 riders, Swift Elk confirmed grimly. Good horses, determined men. They understand your testimony threatens their leader. Can we outrun them? Perhaps. Or perhaps we fight. His tone suggested he was prepared for either eventuality. As they remounted and continued south, Rebecca found her thoughts returning to the small medicine pouch around her neck. Morning Sky had called it ghost medicine, something that enhanced perception beyond normal senses. If pursuers closed in, such heightened awareness might prove crucial. The day passed in a blur of relentless travel, the horse maintaining a pace that Swift Elk assured her was sustainable but urgent. By late afternoon, Rebecca's body ached from the unaccustomed exercise, but she voiced no complaint. Too much depended on their reaching Fort Laramie ahead of Webster's inevitable attempt to silence her testimony. As dusk approached, Swift Elk's posture suddenly stiffened. Riders gaining, he said tersely, must find defensive position before darkness complete. Swift Elk guided their exhausted horse toward a cluster of rock formations that rose from the prairie like nature's fortress. The sandstone buttresses would provide cover and limit the angles from which pursuers could approach, a natural defensive position that might give them the advantage despite being outnumbered. Rifle in saddle, he told Rebecca as they dismounted. 6 shots. I have bow, 12 arrows, hunting knife. Rebecca nodded, processing the inventory of their meager arsenal. How many men follow us? 2 riders still. Maybe more behind we cannot see yet. Swift Elk led the horse into a natural enclosure formed by the rocks. Stay here. I climbed to watch approach. Left alone, Rebecca oriented herself within their stone refuge, using her walking stick to map the immediate surroundings. The space was perhaps 20 feet across, with high rock walls on 3 sides, and a narrow entrance that could be defended by a single person. The ground was sandy, scattered with small rocks, challenging footing for someone without sight. She explored methodically, locating defensible positions and potential hazards, committing each to memory. If fighting came, she needed to move confidently within this space, not stumble or hesitate. The small medicine pouch felt suddenly heavy against her chest. Rebecca fingered it thoughtfully, weighing Morning Sky's warnings against their desperate situation. Not yet, she decided. She would save the ghost medicine for when ordinary senses might not be enough. Swift Elk returned silently, his approach detectable only by the faintest displacement of air that Rebecca's heightened awareness now registered. "Riders stop half-mile." "Back," he reported. "Make camp. Strange choice." "Why strange?" Rebecca asked, sensing his concern. "Could attack before darkness complete." Instead they wait. His voice held suspicion. Perhaps expect others to join them. The tactical implications were clear. If Webster had sent additional men to intercept them, their position could soon become untenable. "How far to Fort Laramie?" Rebecca asked. "Hard day's ride still, too far to reach before sunrise." They settled into an uneasy vigilance as night deepened around them. Swift Elk positioned himself near the narrow entrance to their rocky shelter, bow ready, while Rebecca maintained absolute stillness and focused on auditory surveillance of their surroundings. Hours passed. The night chorus of insects and distant coyotes created a constant sonic backdrop against which any human intrusion would stand out. Rebecca's concentration never wavered, her entire being committed to the task of listening beyond normal capacity. Near midnight, she detected it. The subtle sound of leather against stone, nearly imperceptible but distinctly human in origin. Someone was approaching their position from above, scaling the rocks, rather than entering through the expected pathway. "Swift Elk," she whispered, barely audible. "Above us. Left side." The Cheyenne warrior shifted position immediately, making no sound as he reoriented toward the new threat. Rebecca marveled at his implicit trust in her perception. He asked no questions, demanded no confirmation, simply acted on her warning. The night fell silent again, even the insects pausing as if sensing the deadly game unfolding in their midst. Rebecca focused intently on tracking the intruder's progress, noting each tiny displacement of pebbles, each subtle scrape of boot against stone. The attack, when it came, was swift and nearly silent. A dark figure dropped from above, landing with remarkable stealth considering the height. But Swift Elk was ready, having tracked the approach through Rebecca's warnings. His bow sang once, the arrow finding its mark with a solid impact, followed by a muffled grunt. The intruder wasn't finished. Despite being wounded, he charged toward Swift Elk with a wicked blade gleaming in the faint starlight. Rebecca heard the clash as knife met knife, the desperate breathing of men locked in close combat where one mistake meant death. The second attacker chose that moment to appear at the entrance, rifle raised. Rebecca reacted without conscious thought, hurling a fist-sized rock toward the sound of his approach. Her aim, guided by sound alone, struck his shoulder, not enough to injure seriously but sufficient to disrupt his aim. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the rock wall. Swift Elk and his opponent continued their lethal dance, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Rebecca could track their movements through sound, the scuffing of feet in sand, the impact of bodies against stone, the controlled breathing of trained fighters. She positioned herself carefully, another rock ready, waiting for an opportunity to assist without endangering Swift Elk. The rifleman at the entrance chambered another round, his movements betraying his position precisely to Rebecca's attuned hearing. She threw again, this time striking his hand directly. The rifle clattered to the ground as he cursed viciously. "Blind witch!" he snarled, drawing what sounded like a revolver from his belt. Rebecca dropped to the ground as the first shot exploded, the bullet passing through the space where she had stood moments before. She rolled toward the sound of the fallen rifle, fingers searching desperately across the sandy ground. Swift Elk shouted something in Cheyenne, a warning perhaps, but was clearly still engaged with his own opponent. Rebecca was on her own, against an armed man who now knew her secret. Her hand closed around the fallen rifle just as a second pistol shot kicked up sand inches from her face. She rolled again, clutching the weapon, mind racing to recall what Matthew had taught her about firearms years ago. The weight suggested it was loaded, but she had no way to aim with precision. A third shot came closer still. The gunman was adjusting to her movements, predicting rather than reacting. Rebecca realized she had only moments before his next attempt found its mark. With trembling fingers, she reached for the medicine pouch at her neck. No time for hesitation or fear of consequences. She tore it open, placing a small amount of the powder beneath her tongue as Morning Sky had instructed. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Heat surged through her body like wildfire, her heart accelerating to a gallop. The darkness that had been her constant companion suddenly transformed, not into sight as she had known it before blindness, but into something entirely different. A perception of energy, of presence, of movement that transcended ordinary vision. The gunman appeared to her inner sight as a shape of pulsing red intensity, his malevolence palpable as he raised his weapon again. Swift Elk and his opponent were tangled forms of orange and blue energy, locked in combat to her right. The entire landscape revealed itself in ghostly impressions of heat and energy. Rock formations glowing faintly with stored solar warmth. The horse, a steady green presence in the back of the enclosure, and beyond their shelter, more approaching figures, at least 3 more shapes moving steadily closer. Rebecca raised the rifle with newfound certainty, aiming not at the man she perceived but at the weapon he held. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder as it discharged, the bullet striking exactly where she had intended. The revolver shattered in the gunman's hand, sending metal fragments into his face and chest. He screamed, stumbling backward out of the enclosure. Rebecca chambered another round without hesitation, her movements guided by this strange new perception that allowed her to operate the mechanism she had never seen, but now somehow understood perfectly. Swift Elk's battle reached its conclusion, with a sudden, awful finality. A gurgling gasp followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the ground. Rebecca turned, perceiving the Cheyenne warrior standing victorious but wounded, clutching his side where blood flowed freely. "More come," she said urgently, gesturing toward the prairie beyond their shelter. "At least 3, from the south." Swift Elk staggered slightly, pressing a hand to his wound. "How do you know this?" "Ghost medicine," she replied simply, moving to his side. "You're injured. Let me help." "No time," he gasped, though he allowed her to quickly bind the wound with strips torn from her petticoat. "If more raiders come, must move now." Rebecca nodded, the ghost medicine continuing to provide her with extraordinary perception of their surroundings. "The horse is still strong enough to carry both of us. We ride north, circle around pursuers, then continue to Fort Laramie." Swift Elk accepted her assessment without question, recognizing that whatever the medicine had done, it temporarily gave Rebecca advantages he should not dismiss. They mounted quickly, Rebecca taking the reins with unexpected confidence, while Swift Elk clung to her waist, his strength clearly diminishing from blood loss despite the hasty bandaging. They rode into the night, Rebecca guiding the horse with preternatural certainty around obstacles she perceived through the ghost medicine's influence. She could sense the pursuing raiders changing direction to follow, but their greater numbers were offset by confusion and the darkness that hampered them while somehow enhancing her own capabilities. By dawn, the medicine's effects had begun to fade, leaving Rebecca exhausted but still functioning on heightened awareness. They had successfully evaded immediate pursuit and now rode steadily southeast toward Fort Laramie. Swift Elk's condition worried her. His breathing had grown labored, his grip on her waist increasingly weak. "We must stop," she insisted when they reached a small creek around mid-morning. Your wound needs proper attention. Swift Elk offered no argument, a sign of how seriously injured he must be. Rebecca helped him dismount and settle against a cottonwood tree while she examined his wound with careful fingers. The makeshift bandage was soaked with blood, and the flesh beneath felt hot, early signs of infection setting in. "Morning sky gave me medicines for this," she murmured, retrieving the small pouch of healing powders the medicine woman had prepared. She cleaned the wound as best she could with creek water, then applied the potent mixture that would fight infection and slow bleeding. "Fort Laramie, how far now?" she asked as she worked. "Perhaps 6 hours' ride," Swift Elk answered weakly. "If horse stays strong." Rebecca secured a fresh bandage around his torso, knowing the treatment was insufficient, but the best she could manage under the circumstances. "Rest briefly. We'll continue soon." She used the opportunity to refill their water skin and allow the horse to drink and graze. Her own body ached with exhaustion, but she ignored its complaints. Too much depended on reaching Fort Laramie with her testimony. They resumed their journey within the hour, Swift Elk now seated behind Rebecca, his arms wrapped around her waist as much for support as for security. She guided the horse with increasing confidence, despite the fading of the ghost medicine's most dramatic effects. The heightened awareness had recalibrated her other senses in ways that persisted, allowing her to navigate with remarkable accuracy. For a blind woman, the sun climbed higher, bringing the punishing heat of late morning. Rebecca rationed their water carefully, knowing both Swift Elk's wound and their continued exertion increased the risk of dehydration. The terrain gradually changed beneath them, subtle shifts in vegetation and soil composition that she detected through the horse's altered gait. "Prairie gives way to river valley," Swift Elk confirmed when she commented on the change. "Laramie River ahead. Fort stands at River Bend." Their progress slowed as Swift Elk's condition deteriorated further. By early afternoon, he was barely conscious, slumping against Rebecca's back and responding to her questions with single-word answers, or not at all. She maintained their course. Through sheer determination, trusting her enhanced senses and the horse's seeming understanding of their desperate situation. The first indication they were approaching the fort came in the form of distant voices carried on the wind, men calling to each other. The metallic sounds of machinery and construction, the lowing of cattle in holding pens. Civilization after days in wilderness. "We're nearly there," Rebecca told Swift Elk, but received no response. His breathing remained steady against her back, but he had slipped into unconsciousness, his body attempting to preserve strength by shutting down non-essential functions. As they drew closer, Rebecca heard the challenge she had been expecting. "Halt and identify yourselves," a soldier's voice, authoritative and wary. "My name is Rebecca Harlow," she called back, reining the exhausted horse to a stop. "I'm a survivor of the Serpent's Pass wagon train massacre. This man is Swift Elk of the Northern Cheyenne, who helped rescue other survivors and brought me here at great personal risk. He's badly wounded and needs immediate medical attention." A moment of stunned silence followed her announcement, then a flurry of activity as multiple soldiers approached. Rebecca waited with rigid posture, one hand resting protectively over Swift Elk's, where it lay limply against her waist. "Ma'am, are you—" one soldier began, then faltered. "Blind." "Yes," she confirmed matter-of-factly. "And exhausted, thirsty, and in urgent need to speak with your commanding officer about raiders who massacre settlers while disguised as Cheyenne, and massacre Cheyenne while wearing army blue." The directness of her statement created another momentary silence, broken by a new voice, older, carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "I'm Major Robert Hollister, commanding officer of Fort Laramie. Help this woman and her companion down from that horse and bring them inside immediately." Hands reached up to assist Rebecca, but she insisted that Swift Elk be tended to first. "He's wounded defending me from raiders who pursued us." His people helped rescue my brother and others held captive. Without the Cheyenne, I would not be alive to bring you this testimony." The soldiers carefully lifted Swift Elk from the horse and onto a stretcher. Rebecca finally allowed herself to be helped down, her legs nearly buckling as they touched solid ground after so many hours of riding. "The fort surgeon will attend to your friend," Major Hollister assured her, personally offering his arm to steady her. "Now, Mrs. Harlow, I believe you have quite a story to tell." "Not a story, Major," Rebecca corrected firmly. "Testimony. Evidence of atrocities committed by Blackjack Webster and his raiders, who profit from creating conflict between settlers and native peoples." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca was provided with clean water, food, and medical attention for her minor injuries, but she refused to rest until she had provided a complete account of everything she had witnessed. A clerk transcribed her testimony, while Major Hollister and several other officers listened with increasing gravity. "You're certain the leader identified himself as Blackjack Webster?" Hollister asked when she had finished the account of the wagon train massacre. "Absolutely certain," Rebecca confirmed. "His men addressed him by name, and later Morning Sky identified him as a former army scout turned outlaw." The officers exchanged significant glances. "We've had reports of this man's activities for nearly a year," one lieutenant admitted, "but never solid evidence connecting him to both settler massacres and attacks on Cheyenne camps." "Now you have that evidence," Rebecca stated firmly. "And when my brother Matthew arrives with the other rescued captives, you'll have corroboration from multiple witnesses." Major Hollister stood, his decision apparently made. "Lieutenant Carson, prepare a detachment of 20 men. We ride at first light to investigate this raider camp. Lieutenant Phillips, send telegraph messages to Forts Renault and Phil Kearney, advising them of the situation and requesting additional patrols along major trails." The officers dispersed to execute these orders, leaving Rebecca alone with the major. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, his tone softening slightly, "you've demonstrated remarkable courage in bringing this information to us. Many women, indeed many, men would have succumbed to despair after experiencing what you have." Rebecca nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. "Major, I must ask about Swift Elk. How is he?" "The surgeon reports his wound is serious, but not likely fatal with proper care." Hollister hesitated before adding, "I've ordered that he receive the same treatment any of my men would. His actions in helping rescue American citizens and bringing you safely here have earned him that much, at minimum." Relief washed over Rebecca. "Thank you, and when you prepare your expedition, I would request that a message be sent to the Cheyenne hunting camp near the Northern Canyon entrance. Morning Sky should be informed that we arrived safely." "That will be arranged," Hollister promised. "Now I must insist you get some rest. The quartermaster's wife has prepared quarters for you, and the fort's doctor wishes to examine you once you've had some time to recover from your journey." Rebecca finally allowed herself to be guided to the promised accommodations. A small but comfortable room in the officers' quarters, temporarily relinquished by one Captain Evans, who was out on patrol. The bed, though simple by civilian standards, felt luxuriously soft after days of hard ground and horseback travel. As she sank into exhausted slumber, Rebecca's last thoughts were of Morning Sky and the remarkable journey that had transformed her from vulnerable victim to vital witness. The Cheyenne medicine woman had given her far more than physical healing. She had restored Rebecca's belief in her own capabilities, blind or not. 3 days later, Rebecca sat on the fort's eastern porch, feeling the morning sun warm her face as hoofbeats approached from the prairie. Major Hollister had departed with his detachment as promised, while she remained at Fort Laramie, recovering her strength and providing additional details to the officers investigating Webster's criminal network. Swift Elk was healing well under the fort surgeon's care, though he remained uncomfortable inside the military installation. He had begun teaching Rebecca traditional Cheyenne words in the evenings, building on the foundation Morning Sky had established. The approaching riders slowed as they neared the fort gates. Rebecca turned her face toward the sound, an inexplicable certainty growing within her that this moment marked another turning point in her extraordinary journey. "Rebecca!" Matthew's voice carried across the parade ground, confirming her intuition. "Rebecca, we're here!" She stood, not bothering with her walking stick, as she moved confidently toward the sound of her brother's voice. Behind her she heard Swift Elk emerge from the infirmary building, his footsteps still slightly uneven, but growing stronger each day. "The Cheyenne hunting party has arrived with the rescued settlers," a sentry announced formally. "Medicine Woman Morning Sky requests entry to the fort with 7 warriors and 4 civilians. Permission granted," the duty officer responded immediately, following the instructions Major Hollister had left before his departure. Rebecca waited at the bottom of the steps as horses and riders entered the fort. Matthew's arms engulfed her. Moments later, his embrace stronger than it had been during their brief reunion in the canyon. "Sarah?" Rebecca asked immediately. "Here," came a woman's voice, weak but determined. "I'm here, Rebecca." Morning Sky spoke next, her distinctive voice carrying the calm authority Rebecca had come to associate with healing and wisdom. "Your family recovers well. Woman's spirit stronger than raiders knew." The reunion expanded to include Swift Elk, whose greeting to his people was conducted in rapid Cheyenne, interspersed with laughter and expressions of relief. Rebecca stood at the center of this unlikely gathering. Settler and native, military and civilian, all brought together by circumstance and common cause against those who would exploit their differences. Later, as they shared a meal provided by the fort's kitchens, Morning Sky sat beside Rebecca and spoke quietly. "Ghost medicine showed its power to you." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "Yes, it saved our lives when raiders attacked our shelter." "Medicine reveals truth that was always there," Morning Sky observed. "Eyes of flesh see surfaces, eyes of spirit see essence." Her hand briefly touched Rebecca's. "You have always had second sight, even before first sight was taken." Rebecca considered this perspective thoughtfully. "Perhaps blindness forced me to develop what was already within me. Great darkness sometimes necessary for greatest light." Morning Sky agreed. "Journey continues now, different path opens." Indeed, Major Hollister's expedition against the raiders had already yielded results. A telegram arrived that morning reporting the capture of several of Webster's men and the discovery of evidence linking them to multiple attacks on both settlers and native encampments. Webster himself remained at large, but with his organization crumbling and military patrols alerted throughout the territory, his reign of terror was effectively ended. For Rebecca, the future held new possibilities she could never have imagined when joining her brother's wagon train. Fort Laramie's commanding officer had requested she remain as a liaison between the military and the Northern Cheyenne, helping to build trust where suspicion had prevailed. Morning Sky had offered to continue her training in traditional medicine, while Matthew and Sarah would stay until spring before resuming their journey to Oregon. "I once thought blindness was an ending," Rebecca told Morning Sky as they watched the sunset from the fort's western wall, she perceiving it through the changing warmth on her skin, the medicine woman seeing the brilliant colors painting the prairie. "Now I understand it was merely a beginning." "All endings are beginnings," Morning Sky replied with the simple wisdom that characterized her teachings. "Circle always continues. Tomorrow's sun already rises somewhere beyond horizon." Rebecca, nodded, feeling the truth of this perspective resonate within her. The darkness had indeed taught her to see in ways she never could have imagined, not just the physical world around her, but the deeper currents of human connection that transcended the artificial boundaries between peoples. She would never again perceive the world through eyes of flesh, but through the eyes of spirit. She had gained a vision more profound than mere sight could provide. 2 years later, Rebecca Harlow moved confidently through the trading post she now managed at the eastern edge of Fort Laramie. Her fingers danced across shelves, stocked with supplies, identifying items by texture, weight, and position without hesitation. The small bell above the door announced a customer's arrival, the light, deliberate step instantly recognizable to her trained ear. "Good morning, Swift Elk," she greeted, turning toward the entrance. "The Army Paymaster delivered the medical supplies you requested for Morning Sky. Everything's bundled and ready." "Your ears remain sharp as Hawk's vision," Swift Elk replied, his English having improved dramatically during his frequent visits to the fort. No longer the wounded warrior who had risked everything to bring her to safety, he now served as official liaison between the Northern Cheyenne and the Army Command. "Morning Sky's training doesn't fade," Rebecca responded with a smile. "How is she? Strong in body, stronger in spirit. She asks when you will visit the winter camp again, says your healing touch is missed." Rebecca nodded, warmth spreading through her at the mention of her mentor. After testifying at Blackjack Webster's trial, the outlaw finally captured near the Montana border 6 months after their arrival at Fort Laramie. Rebecca had apprenticed formally under Morning Sky, learning traditional medicine while teaching English and settler customs in return. "Tell her after the first snow, the fort commander needs my help with treaty negotiations until then." The position Rebecca now held would have seemed impossible in her previous life. She had become interpreter of more than just language. She bridged worlds, translating cultural perspectives and intentions between military authorities and native leaders, with an insight uniquely honed by her experiences. "Letters arrived from Oregon," Swift Elk mentioned, changing the subject as he gathered the medical supplies. "Your brother's family?" "Yes, Matthew and Sarah are well. Their homestead flourishes, and Sarah is expecting their first child in spring." Rebecca's hand unconsciously touched the beaded medicine pouch at her throat. Morning Sky's gift, now a permanent part of her attire. "They've invited me to visit next summer, but my work here feels unfinished." The work encompassed more than her official duties. Under Rebecca's guidance, Fort Laramie had established regular trading days with neighboring tribes, medical exchanges between army doctors and native healers, and educational opportunities for children from both communities. Small steps toward understanding built on the foundation of her remarkable journey. "Path reveals itself when feet are ready to walk it," Swift Elk observed, quoting one of Morning Sky's favorite sayings. Rebecca smiled in acknowledgement. "The territorial governor arrives tomorrow to review our progress. Perhaps after his visit, I'll see more clearly which direction that path leads." After Swift Elk departed, Rebecca closed the trading post early, walking with practiced ease through the fort's busy pathways toward the eastern bluff overlooking the Laramie River. It had become her place of reflection, where the afternoon sun warmed her face, and the wind carried sounds and scents from miles across the prairie. She settled on a weathered bench, running her fingers over the smooth wood worn by countless hours of similar contemplation. The world that had once seemed shattered beyond repair had reformed into something neither wholly new nor entirely familiar. A landscape navigated differently, but no less fully than before. The massacre that had stranded her in Two Eagles Canyon now seemed like a distant nightmare, its horror diminished not through forgetting, but through the healing power of what followed. Morning Sky's wisdom, Swift Elk's courage, the bridge built between communities that had previously viewed each other with suspicion, These were the lasting legacies of that terrible day. Webster's eventual hanging had brought formal justice, but Rebecca found greater satisfaction in the changed relationships between settlers and native peoples in the territory. While tensions certainly remained, the exposure of raiders who had deliberately inflamed hostilities had created space for dialogue where none existed before. Matthew and Sarah had ultimately continued to Oregon after recovering at Fort Laramie, understanding Rebecca's decision to remain behind. "You've found your purpose here," Matthew had said before departing. "Thomas would be proud of the woman you've become." The thought of her late husband brought a wistful smile. Thomas had known her in sight, but never witnessed the strength blindness had revealed within her. A familiar tread approached from behind. Major Hollister, now promoted to colonel, his gait instantly identifiable to Rebecca's trained ear. "Mrs. Harlow," he greeted, settling beside her on the bench. "Contemplating the sunset again?" "In my own way," she replied with the gentle humor that had become her hallmark. The warmth changes as evening approaches, different texture to the air. Hollister made a thoughtful sound. "The governor's assistant arrived ahead of schedule. He brings news you'll find interesting. The Territorial Assembly has approved funds for a permanent liaison office between settlements and native communities. They're offering you the appointment." Rebecca turned toward him, surprise evident in her expression. "Official recognition, after all the resistance we've faced." "Your testimony saved lives on both sides of a conflict that benefited only criminals," Hollister said simply. "The governor may be a politician, but he recognizes value when he sees it." As the colonel departed, leaving her to consider this unexpected development, Rebecca's thoughts returned to the desperate woman who had hidden in canyon shadows, certain her life was ending. How strange that darkness had ultimately led to such light, not despite her blindness, but because of what it taught her to see. The journey that began in terror had transformed into a path of purpose. Through eyes that perceived beyond sight, Rebecca had found her true vision at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.